So what does it mean to be a reconciling in Christ congregation? Why does that matter? Here's the thing. Each one of us is created fully and completely in the image of God. Each person. This is the foundational piece, the core of our very identity as people. The challenge we have is to overcome the labels that we tend to put on one another. The human labels and categories that we use to rise up above, that become more important to us than simply the image of God in which we're created. And we trust those labels more than we trust the image of God. This is what Paul is dealing with in the 3rd chapter of Galatians, when he says that the labels that we use to categorize one another no longer matter because we're in Christ. The image of God is the thing that matters in Christ. So he does away with those labels. He says there is no longer slave or free. There is no longer Jew or free. There is no longer even male and female. The image of God is the thing that matters. Each one of us in Christ fully reflects the image of God in which we're created. Now, contrary to that, historically, the LGBTQ community has somehow acquired, we've put on that community this label of not being fully revealing of the image of God because of a label that we have imposed, not somehow really revealing this image of God. So being a reconciling in Christ congregation is one important step that we can take as a congregation that says publicly that no matter who you are, we recognize you. Regardless of any labels that have been imposed on you, we recognize you as a full-fledged child of God, created in the image of God. That's what we see when we look at you. First and foremost, you are created by God and in God's image. And that alone makes you worthwhile. That's what we will see. And we will love you because you are in the image of God. When we adopt this welcoming statement and become a reconciling in Christ congregation, that's what we're saying. And we're saying it publicly. We need to do this.
Hi everyone, I'm Jamie and I use they them pronouns. When I walk or drive somewhere and I see a church with a rainbow flag up or some other display of support for the LGBTQ plus community, my heart is filled with joy and warmth. It reminds me that the people who would try to wield religion like a weapon for hate against certain individuals and communities are not the only voice out there, and that those voices are just really good at being loud. Support for queer people in the Lutheran and religious communities as a whole, while very much present, is often quiet. And when the only other voice to fill that void is hatred, it drives queer people away from communities that could potentially help them in very profound ways. And that's why LCM becoming a reconciling in Christ church is so important. To add our voices to the chorus of loving people in this world, and to mend and strengthen the relationships of two communities and the individuals within them. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kathy Bakke, and voting yes to make LCM a Reconciling in Christ congregation is important to me because LCM is a wonderful, welcoming congregation, and I want everyone to know that. By being identified as a RIC congregation by the ELCA, LCM will be known as a congregation that welcomes the LGBTQ community to worship, to commune, to be loved and cared for by me, by you, and by everyone who is part of LCM. I want my 92-year-old lesbian aunt, my 31-year-old transgender nephew, and my son's gay godfather, and every single person who walks through the front door of LCM to know immediately that they are loved, welcomed, and cherished as a child of God. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Erin. Growing up, religion was always used against me and people that I love as a weapon. It was why for the longest time I said I was an atheist, because any God that promoted that type of hate over things no one had control over, I wanted nothing a part of. I didn't know that there were actual churches that were nice and loving until Jamie introduced me to this one. When I was approached about doing RSC for this church, it was one of the first things in my life where I felt like this was right, that this was something I was made to do for this world. I want others to experience the love of this church, especially when so many other places are cold and dark to them just because they might be LGBTQ.